nuclear war. We came that close to nuclear war at the end. Rational individuals. Kennedy was rational. Khrushchev was rational. Castro was rational. Rational individuals came that close to total destruction of their societies. And that danger exists today. The major lesson of the Cuban Missile Crisis is this: the indefinite combination of human fallibility and nuclear weapons will destroy nations. Is it right and proper that today there are 7,500 strategic offensive nuclear warheads, of which 2,500 are on 15-minute alert to be launched by the decision of one human being? It wasn't until January 1992, in a meeting chaired by Castro in Havana, Cuba, that I learned 162 nuclear warheads, including 90 tactical warheads, were on the island at the time of this critical moment of the crisis. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and Castro got very angry with me because I said, Mr. President, let's stop this meeting. This is totally new to me. I'm not sure I got the translation right. Mr. President, I have 3 questions to you. Number 1, did you know the nuclear warheads were there? Number 2, if you did, would you have recommended to Khrushchev, in the face of a U.S. attack, that he use them? Number 3, if he had used them, what would have happened to Cuba? He said, number 1, I knew they were there. Number 2, I would not have recommended to Khrushchev. I did recommend to Khrushchev that they be used. Number 3, what would have happened to Cuba? It would have been totally destroyed. That's how close we were.
And he was willing to accept that?
Yes. Oh, and he went on to say, Mr. McNamara, if you and President Kennedy had been in a similar situation, that's what you would have done. I said, Mr. President, I hope to God we would not have done it. Pull the temple down on our heads, my God. In a sense, we'd won. We got the missiles out without war. My deputy and I brought the 5 chiefs over. We sat down with Kennedy, and he said, gentlemen, we won. I don't want you ever to say it, but you know we won. I know we won. And LeMay said, won hell. We lost. We should go in and wipe them out today. LeMay believed that ultimately we're going to confront these people in a conflict with nuclear weapons, and by God, we better do it when we have greater superiority than we will have in the future. At the time, we had a 17-to-1 strategic advantage in nuclear numbers. We'd done 10 times as many tests as they had. We were certain we could retain that advantage if we limited the tests. The chiefs were all opposed. They said the Soviets will cheat. Well, I said, how will they cheat? You won't believe this, but they said, now test them behind the moon. They said, you're out of your mind. I said, that's absurd. It's almost impossible for our people today to put themselves back into that period. In my 7 years as secretary, we came within a hair's breadth of war with the Soviet Union on 3 different occasions. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. For 7 years as Secretary of Defense, I lived the Cold War. During the Kennedy administration, they designed a 100 megaton bomb. It was tested in the atmosphere. I remember this. Cold War? Hell, it was a hot war. I think the human race needs to think more about killing, about conflict. Is that what we want in this 21st century? My earliest memory is of a city exploding with joy. It was November 11, 1918. I was 2 years old. You may not believe that I have the memory, but I do. I remember the tops of the streetcars being crowded with human beings cheering and kissing and screaming. Into World War I. We'd won. But also celebrating the belief of many Americans, particularly Woodrow Wilson, we'd fought a war to end all wars. His dream was that the world could avoid great wars in the future. Disputes among great nations would be resolved. I also remember that I wasn't allowed to go outdoors to play with my friends without wearing a mask. It was an ungodly flu epidemic. Large numbers of Americans were dying, 600,000, and millions across the world. My class in the first grade was housed in a shack, a wooden shack. But we had an absolutely superb teacher. And this teacher gave a test to the class every month. And she reseated the class based on the results of that test. There were vertical rows. And she put the person with the highest grade in the first seat in the left-hand row. And I worked my tail off to be in that first seat. Now, the majority of the classmates were whites, Caucasians, so on, WASPs, if you will. But my competition for that first seat were Chinese, Japanese, and Jews. On the Saturday and Sunday, I went and played with my classmates. They went to their ethnic schools. They learned their native language. They learned their culture, their history, and they came back determined on Monday to beat that damn Irishman. But they didn't do it very often.
One congressman called you Mr. I Have All the Answers McNamara, and there's been suggestion from some congressmen that you come up there, in spite of the weight of their experience, prepared to give them simple little lessons in things. Is that your attitude?
No, perhaps they don't know how much I don't know, and there's much indeed. I do make a serious effort to prepare myself properly for these congressional discussions. I suppose I spend perhaps 100 or 120 hours in testifying before Congress each year, and each hour of testimony requires 3 to 4 hours of preparation.
What about the contention that your attitude is sometimes arrogant, that you never admit you were wrong? Have you ever been wrong, sir?
Oh, yes, indeed. My heavens. I'm not going to tell you what I've been wrong. If you don't know, I'm not going to tell you, but on countless occasions.
I applied to Stanford University. I very much wanted to go, but I couldn't afford it. So I lived at home and I went to Berkeley. $52 a year tuition. I started Berkeley, the bottom of the Depression. 25 million males were unemployed. Out of that class of 3,500, 3 elected to Phi Beta Kappa at the end of the sophomore year. Of those 3, 1 became a Rhodes Scholar. I went to Harvard. The third went to work for $65 a month and was damn happy to have the job. The society was on the verge of, I don't want to say revolution, although had Roosevelt not done some of the things he did, it could have become far more violent. In any event, that was what I was thrown into. I never heard of Plato and Aristotle before I became a freshman at Berkeley. And I remember the professor, Lowenberg, the freshman philosophy professor, I couldn't wait to go to another class. I took more philosophy courses, particularly one in logic and one in ethics. The stress on values is something beyond oneself and a responsibility to society. After graduating from the University of California, I went to Harvard Graduate School of Business for 2 years. And then I went back to San Francisco. I began to court this young lady that I'd met when we were 17 in our first week at Berkeley, Margaret Craig. And I was making some progress after 8 or 9 months. I proposed, and she accepted. She went with her aunt and her mother on a trip across the country. She telegraphed me, must order engraved invitations to include your middle name. What is it? And I wired back, my middle name is Strange. And she said, I know it's strange, but what is it? Well, it is strange. It's Robert Strange McNamara. And it was a marriage made in heaven. At the end of a year, we had our first child. The delivery costs were $100, and we paid that $10 a month. Those were some of the happiest days of our lives. And then the war came. I'd been promoted to assistant professor. I was the youngest assistant professor at Harvard. And to a salary, by the way, of $4,000 a year. Harvard Business School's market was drying up. The males were being drafted or volunteering. So the dean, being farsighted, brought back a government contract to establish an officer candidate school for what was called statistical control in the Air Force. We said to the Air Force, look, we're not going to take anybody you send up here. We're going to select the people. You have a punch card for every human being brought into the Air Corps. We're going to run those punch cards through the IBM sorting machines, and we're going to sort on age, education, accomplishment, grades, etc. We were looking for the best and the brightest. The best brains, the greatest capacity to lead, the best judgment. The U.S. was just beginning to bomb. We were bombing by daylight. The loss rate was very, very high. So they commissioned a study. And what did we find? We found the abort rate was 20%. 20% of the planes that took off from England to bomb targets in Germany turned around before they got to the target. Well, that was a hell of a mess. We lost 20% of our capability right there. A form, I think it was called Form 1A or something like that, was a mission report. And if you aborted a mission, you had to write down why. So we get all these things and we analyze them. And we finally concluded it was baloney. They were aborting out of fear because the loss rate was 4% per sortie. The combat tour was 25 sorties. Didn't mean 100% were going to be killed, but a hell of a lot of them were going to be killed. They knew that, and they found reasons to not go over the target. So we reported this. One of the commanders was Curtis LeMay, colonel in command of a B-24 group. He was the finest combat commander of any service I came across in the war, but he was extraordinarily belligerent. Many thought brutal. He got the report, he issued an order